recently produced a report called Left Behind by the G20. Now, the key messages that emerge from this research are that whilst the G20 has made global commitments on supporting inclusive and shared growth, in fact, the research shows that 14 out of 18 G20 countries have seen inequality increasing since 1990. And the exceptions to this are only 4. We have the exceptions of Brazil, Mexico, Argentina and Korea. So Korea is the only high-income country across the G20 where inequality has reduced in the last 2 decades. We feel that this sends a really clear message that inequality matters. The OECD has recently released a report looking at inequality increasing across OECD members as well. We feel it shows that promoting growth alone is not enough and that really governments need to be targeting inequality as well with specific policies.
What could be the core explanations to why the inequality has been on the rise in those countries?
Well, what the research shows is that countries haven't been doing enough to tackle inequality. I mean, they've been pursuing growth, a form of sort of growth fundamentalism at the expense of reducing inequality and reducing poverty. They've not been focusing enough on sharing the benefits of growth. This is a tragedy because not only does it mean that poverty has sometimes remained stagnant, but it also means that inequality has been acting as a brake on growth. So it's actually been holding back growth. I mean, there's lots of evidence around this. The IMF has recently said this again as well. So this is a tragedy for growth as well as for poverty. Now, countries that have invested in redistributive policies, invested in healthcare and education that's free and public, invested in cash transfers and supporting populations to raise them out of poverty, those countries have managed to reduce inequality. And, you know, again, what the report shows is that unlike what has been previously stated, inequality doesn't have to be a particular stage of growth. We can tackle inequality. Governments can choose to tackle it. They can make the decision to tackle poverty and reduce inequality and help share the benefits of growth. And the case studies that we worked on were particularly interesting in terms of revealing this.
Do I get it right that when nowadays most governments are trying to resist the pressures from another wave of economic crisis by introducing certain austerity measures and cutting social programs, they're only deteriorating the situation in their countries? Is my understanding correct?
What we certainly think is that if governments want to see inequality and poverty reduced, then they can't rely on growth alone. They need to be investing in those kinds of social programs, as you say, and that means investing in healthcare and education. It also means investing in policies like progressive taxation and closing down loopholes that see finances leak out of economies. That's vital money that could go towards helping finance essential services like health and education. So we certainly think that governments can make the decision to put more emphasis on those social programs, as you call them.
I've been reading several reports coming from Davos this year, and many of them state that the disillusionment that accompanies the growing inequality and the lowering life standards is actually targeting the whole of the system of free market values, democratic governments, which are now at the helm of certain countries. So would you support the vision that growing inequality hurts the ideology of free markets and democracy as such?
I think certainly what we're seeing as a result of this crisis and growing inequality is that people are really losing faith in the economic system that has generated such an enormous crisis with implications for people across the globe. Certainly that's why we see sort of the resentment being generated amongst the public, the anger about the amount of money that was earned not fairly shared by the financial sector. And that's, for example, one of the reasons why so many people, particularly across Europe but globally, have been calling for a tax on the financial sector, a financial transaction tax, something that people are hoping will bring in money from the financial sector and be redistributed to tackle some of these social problems, both in G20 countries and also in developing countries. So I think this is part of a bigger picture about why people are angry about the crisis and how it has manifested itself in economies across the world. And it's really impacted on people's lives, of course, as you say.
Is there a way out?
Well, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot more research that needs to be done, and certainly Oxfam wouldn't be prescriptive about what policies to apply across the board. There needs to be research nationally to look at the national context. But we certainly think that there are general principles that governments need to be following. And as I've said before, they need to be investing in inequality-reducing policies that bolster growth and reduce poverty. And we think that investing in essential services like healthcare and education that are free and public publicly provided really have to be at the heart of this. I mean, there's an awful lot of evidence out there that shows that when governments invest in healthcare and education, they enable people to participate in a productive economy. They enable people to participate in working. I mean, if people aren't healthy and they don't have the right skills to participate in the economy, then growth simply can't happen in a really productive way. And those benefits of growth can't be shared. So, yeah, we definitely think that governments can do things to tackle this.
So, but that implies that governments should play a greater role in national economies.
We think that there are things that governments can do with regards to policies, and it doesn't necessarily need to be that they play a greater role in state management of the economy, of course not. But what governments do need to do is look at the way they're spending their budgets and decide in the long term whether they want to make the decision through austerity cuts not to invest in the crucial services like health and education. And we think governments should be playing that role. They can certainly make a decision to do that. And we think that's a responsible thing for them to do.
So, Jasmine, with all the data that Oxfam has accumulated on the issue, so what is your forecast? How do you see the whole situation is going to develop in global perspective?
You know, we're optimistic that governments will take responsibility, and we hope that through measures like a financial transaction tax, we'll look forward to seeing the financial sector, the financial economy, paying more, contributing the fair amount to the economy as a whole and to help raise people out of poverty. We also hope that these are issues which will be tackled by the G20 in Mexico this year. One thing we'd like to see is the Mexican government and members of the G20 looking at proposing new measures of growth that go beyond GDP, looking at monitoring inequality across the G20 so that they can start to put in place policies to tackle it.
Thank you very much. Just to remind you, our guest speaker was Jasmine Burnley, Global Economic Crisis Senior Policy Advisor for Oxfam, the UK.